We've all had quite a bit of mystery in our lives at some point or another, but I think that today's mystery in this video is one that I don't think many of us can say that we necessarily have had anything like this happen to us. This is just one of those weird stories, one of those almost once-in-a-lifetime out of there stories that you just would never really expect. But just as much as we would never really necessarily expect a story like this to come up in our newsfeed, I can't imagine the randomness that the people who consistently had to deal with this mystery firsthand were dealing with themselves. From an outsider's perspective, it's just almost funny. But to those who have, walked this beach for however long this mystery has been going on, cleaning this beach for however long this mystery has gone on for, it's probably been quite creepy, to say the least. I mean, when you see the same thing over and over and over again hundreds of times washing up after you just cleaned the same thing away just a week ago. For people in Western France along a beachside, the mystery we'll be talking about today is a novelty phone. But not just any novelty phone, one that is shaped like Garfield, the famous cartoon cat. Or should I say, one of the most famous cartoons of all time. Now, when you see something like this, you almost can't believe it. It's a really good joke if it's fake, but it's not. When I first saw this, I was in disbelief. I thought that this was some sort of prank going on. As the article came out near April 1st, I thought maybe it was an April Fool's prank that had happened maybe a day or two too early. However, I was wrong, because for the last 3 decades or so, a beach in Western France has dealt with hundreds of novelty Garfield cat phones washing up on the beachside from the Atlantic Ocean. Locals who lived in the area for however long this mystery has been going on have frequented the beach site to see these phones literally just nested in the sand after being washed up by the tide, picking up everything from full phones to cable wires to even broken off paws, ears, and pieces of these phones. And throughout this entire ordeal, throughout these decades, nobody had any sort of idea as to where these were coming from, where the source of this problem was, and why really this beach was the only target. To trace back the source of these Garfield phones, we have to figure out exactly which telephones these actually are and who they were manufactured by. Thankfully, this work has already been done. The phones that ended up washing alongside this beach, made as a Garfield novelty item, were made by a company called Tyco in the 1980s. These phones were advertised as real phones for real fun, and featured a keypad, had an electric ring, and Garfield's eyelids even slid halfway open when you picked up the handset. When you look these items up, you can find them in an array of conditions, even some being still in mint vintage 1980s conditions, and they still actually sell as vintage items. They're still common at flea markets, auction websites, and more. Now, I don't necessarily know how many of these products were actually made or really how popular they were, as I wasn't alive in the 1980s, but I can tell you that they were popular enough that they were actually shipped overseas, which is kind of how this whole thing started. Let me explain. Being manufactured in the 1980s and obviously selling at least decently well, there was still demand for these Garfield novelty phones. During a shipping process in which a shipping container full of the phones was on some sort of boat that was traveling through the area near this beach in Western France, a storm struck. Apparently this storm was extremely bad and took place in the early 1980s, probably right around the height of popularity, really, of these entire phones and this, I guess, fad, really, of Garfield novelty items. This storm apparently was able to be so powerful that it somehow knocked one of these shipping containers off of the ship, most likely without them noticing, or if being noticed, obviously not being something that they could just stop the ship in the middle of a storm and really regather. Honestly, it seems like this shipping crate being dropped in the water most likely went unreported as the storm knocked it off in the water. They didn't really want to deal with the problem anymore, and in all honesty, it was probably just one shipping crate. And let's be honest, when it comes down to it, I think the last product they were worried about losing was a bunch of novelty Garfield phones. However, the locals did not know that this was really the cause of these Garfield phones even being in the water in the first place until, of course, word of mouth. Volunteers in Brittany, France, tracked down the source of the phones because a local man had told them about an extremely bad storm that struck in the early 1980s, which really was their first lead on what possibly could actually be what caused this whole thing. Knowing that there was a massive storm and, of course, hundreds of pieces of plastic waste from these phones washing up over over the last 30 or so years. These volunteers clearly had reason to suspect that maybe the storm had something to do with it, at the time not knowing that it was a shipping container being the problem. With that being said, they eventually figured out that it was most likely coming from some sea cave nearby. This sea cave is generally cut off by the tide and is really only accessible a few days each year, which kind of limits their ability to get inside of the cave and see what the problem was. Or should I say, even if the problem was coming from this cave. Seeing the time window finally come to really be for them, and realizing this might be their only opportunity for at least another year to figure out if this cave really was the source of these Garfield phones washing up on their beaches, creeping out the locals, and being a problem for over 3 decades, the volunteers decided to enter the sea cave and see what was going on. When they went into the sea cave, they found a large metal container. When going inside of this container and checking it out, they found God knows how many Garfield-shaped phone shells, which actually still contained possibly dangerous electronic components. I can only imagine how really astonished they were when they walked in and saw this crate. I mean, honestly, I would be so creeped out, I don't even know what I would do. Now that they had really heard the legend as to what was possibly behind these Garfield phones washing up on the beach, they found the source of these Garfield phones in this cave along the beach, and their mystery was pretty much solved. It seems like, at least for now, this whole case has finally been cracked. However, there hasn't been any mentioning of them actually cleaning up the mess, which means that for, who really knows how much more long they will go on, they might just keep having these Garfield phones wash up on the beach. But apparently this is a pretty common problem. Might not necessarily be really common to be walking along the beach and then all of a sudden that same vintage Garfield novelty phone that you had as a child in the 1980s washes up on the beach, but I'm more or less talking about really shipping crates falling off of ships and, of course, being lost. You have to realize really the gravity of how much we ship things over water. Every single year, around 148 million shipping containers are sent overseas through these boats. And then between the years 2008 and 2016, shipping companies lost over 1,500 containers on average every year. Most of this actually takes place during accidents like capsizing, running aground, or when sailing in heavy seas that might just be too powerful for the ship. Of course, you're going to run into issues like this when so many crates end up in the water. As a matter of fact, in one accident in 2014, more than 500 containers were lost, as a ship ran into a storm in the Bay of Biscay, which obviously, if you can imagine just one crate of all these Garfield phones washing up into a cave and eventually running, I guess, all over the coast of this area in France, imagine how many goods and possibly just random things came from this accident in 2014. Thankfully though, most of the containers in that 2014 accident were then confirmed to be empty, and none of them contained any sort of hazardous material. But even then, it's a very close call, and God only knows how many more accidents could happen like this in future years. Of course, we ship all kinds of different things, sometimes dangerous, and these can be really harmful to coastal communities and marine life in the water. Obviously, these bits and pieces of plastic floating around in the water from these Garfield phones are not really good for fish to consume, and of course, being plastic, it takes them God knows how long really to break down, hundreds of years at best. I mean, it's been 30 years since the accident knocked all of these Garfield phones off into the water, and a lot of them are still washing up in basically pristine condition. It's going to take a long time for these things to break down and degrade, but on top of that, all these fish are consuming them, this beach is being littered with them. That kind of stuff isn't good, obviously. It's not good for humans, and of course, it's not good for the marine life who have to live in that water. Like I said earlier, it's pretty likely that if that crate fell off, they just probably didn't report it, and if they did, it just honestly wasn't worth their time to go back and get. I mean, how profitable can a crate full of Garfield phones truly be? But another thing that really kind of, I guess, makes this even worse is that the rules for reporting and dealing with these lost containers in the water are not really uniform throughout the world. In May of this year, the International Maritime Organization plans to discuss on setting some standard procedures up, that way people can actually report these lost containers, and so they can address liability and the loss of consumer plastic goods. But of course, since this really happened in the 1980s, which, over 30 years ago at this point, going on 40, maybe 50, by time you watch this video in whatever year, Obviously, the rules were probably a lot more lax even then. So with that being said, one of the creepier mysteries that I think I've ever really seen when it comes to Garfield phones washing up on beaches was solved. And in reality, the cause of this whole thing is just an eye-opening reality to us. We cause a lot of damage to this planet, whether it's intentionally or unintentionally. Things like this that you would think, probably not that harmful in general, can be extremely harmful, not only to just the animals, but to us as well. This community is going to have to deal with pieces of plastic and entire Garfield phones washing up on their coastlines for years, if not more decades. Because in reality, who knows how many more of these just washed deeper into the water and will eventually make their way back up. Be careful with what you do, guys. Be a little bit more conscious with your decisions. Don't throw your Garfield phones in the water because people in France will end up getting them, and they generally don't like that. So thank you guys for watching this video. It's a little bit of a change of pace, but honestly, this is just really weird. I wanted to talk about it. If you did enjoy, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you're brand new around here on my channel. Follow me over on Twitter at @SubToOptimus. I post memes, thoughts, and updates over there. It's a surefire way to get all the newest notifications for my brand new content. Join the Discord down below. Lots of great things going on down there. Thank you to my channel members for your $5 a month. Your support helps my channel tremendously. If you'd like to help support my channel for only $5 a month, you can do so by hitting the join button down below or the become a channel member link in the description. And until my next video, guys, this is Optimus, getting Garfield phones to wash up in the river and signing out.